Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar with SmileBack. My name is Violet, and I am hosting this webinar today. So this webinar is in our partner integration series, and it's going to be focused on customer loyalty. So we have customer loyalty specialist SmileBack with us today, and they're going to teach us all about how to measure customer feedback and how you can spearhead more loyal customers to improve your business. So our partner integration series is all about technology that works alongside Domotz to improve your service business. And with that, JB, next slide.
Go to the next slide for you there, Violet. There we go.
So what is this partner integration series? I kind of touched on that already. So it focuses on the technology that works alongside Domotz to help you run your business more efficiently. And I'll just mention we're always on the lookout for new ideas or people that want to be a guest on our webinars. So just write to us at marketing@domotz.com and if you have an idea or want to be involved in some way. So with us today, we have the Managing Director of SmileBack, Andrew Wallace.
Wallace, yep.
I didn't practice that before, so I hope I've done that all right. And most of you familiar with Domotz already know JB Fowler, our CPO, who's just disappeared.
Yes. I just wanted to make sure I made an entrance. That's why I went off screen and back on. So I am absolutely glad to be here, and I'm absolutely excited to talk about feedback from customers. For Domotz, we're all about generating loyalty with our customers, helping run your business more efficiently. And in some of the discussions I've had with Andrew about what they do, I thought it was very, very pertinent to bring to the forefront their technologies and how they look at feedback, how they help you as an integrator, as a service provider, understand the feedback from your customers. So excited to be here. Let me, Violet, I think it's worthwhile, if you don't mind, because I know we have quite a few with all of our partner integration series webinars. We have customers that come from our partner side and they don't know exactly what Domotz is, but then there's also a lot of Domotz customers on these that may not understand what our partners do, in this case, SmileBack. But let me briefly talk about Domotz for those from the SmileBack customer side. And I won't go into long, I just want to have this one slide here. Domotz fundamentally is network monitoring software. We are a network management solution. We look at the network holistically and we try to understand, what does the network look like? What are the devices that are on that network? How can we better manage or help you as a service provider better manage the networks and all of the systems that are tied to that network to help you, one, be more efficient, help you satisfy the service level agreements that you have in place with your customers. And then ultimately, we want to make you look like a hero. And we do that through these means. We discover all of the devices that are on that network, anything that is network connected, whether it's Ethernet based or Wi-Fi based. We're going to discover those. We're going to classify the devices to let you know make, model, and I think more importantly, the type of device that's on that network, so that when you're walking into a customer, you understand exactly how many devices that are there and what types of devices. Of course, understanding that network inventory and asset is only good if you can do something about it. And Domotz allows you to proactively monitor. We allow you to generate alerts on those devices if they're not behaving as expected, or if they fall offline unexpectedly. You can get alerts. We also do things like security alerts. So if ports are being opened on the network, whether it's at the firewall level or from the inside back out to the network, we can alert you to that because that can be a vulnerability on your network. So Domotz is extremely powerful when it comes to the discovery and the alerting of these devices. Of course, we integrate into many different tools that you as a service provider are using as well. When an alert occurs, when a ticket gets generated through your PSA tool, being able to manage those systems is really important. And Domotz gives you secure connectivity into those devices, into the system as a whole, or even using things like VPN, virtual private networks, on demand. We can create that so that way you can get in, manage the network, understand the devices that are having trouble issues, and then reconfigure them or power cycle them. We do that very easily. And of course, we couldn't talk about efficiency if we didn't make our system easy to deploy and easy to use. So these are kind of the 4 fundamental tenets that ultimately drive, in my mind, you as a service provider, efficiency into your business, but then also that customer loyalty. How do we improve that? Now, all that being said, customer loyalty is only as good as you can measure it, which is why we wanted to introduce SmileBack to you today. And I'm really, really excited about what Andrew's going to talk about. Andrew, I'm going to turn it over to you for a while. I hope that you don't mind me interrupting with a couple of the points that you make, and then just asking or providing thoughts on how we at Domotz see that, or how that may help, how Domotz can help with that. And then at the end, I definitely want to talk about why the two together make it even more exciting. And the last thing that I want to point out, and Andrew, you brought this up, and I think it's an excellent topic, but we're going to do an experiment over the next 6 months. And I don't want to give away too much now, but stay on the webinar so you can figure out how you can become one of our guinea pigs to implement this. Andrew, with that being said, I'll let you take it away for a bit.
Sorry, just one interruption first. I just wanted to say that feel free to ask questions in the question box throughout. We're going to be pausing and answering those.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just going to put a little poll in right now for everyone to answer about what you're currently using to track customer feedback.
Yeah, perfect. Were you able to launch that, Violet, that poll?
Ooh, neat.
There it is. There's the poll. So let me share the slide again. So yeah, Andrew, this is your slide. Are you able to see the results of some of that poll, or do you want me to give you some information as it comes up?
I can see the poll in progress. I can't see the presentation anymore, though. It just says quick poll. How do you track customer feedback? And I can answer for me. So we do NPS and CSAT. And yes, we do track customer feedback. That's why we're here. And yes, we do believe in feedback. And I can see that, so 50% of the people here are using CSAT, 33% get feedback via email, 17 don't, and that's why they're here, so that's great. And 0% are using NPS, which is, there's a lot of acronyms in the MSP space. There's particularly a lot of acronyms in the feedback space. So for those of you who may not be familiar, we'll get into what these things are, but for now, NPS is Net Promoter Score, and CSAT, or CSAT, is customer satisfaction. And the ones I'm most familiar with are NPS and CSAT, and those happen to be in the SmileBack product. But the way I want to talk about feedback today and about customer loyalty is agnostic of the SmileBack product. It's more about a theory of how customer loyalty works and how customer loyalty can be built through understanding customer feedback. And so why JB and the team have asked me to talk about this today is because SmileBack is, we have 5+ years experience in this space, and we are a customer satisfaction system that's specifically for MSPs and IT service providers. So that's what we focus our business on and our understanding, our expertise on. There's many other players in a much vaster customer feedback space, but our expertise is definitely in the MSP sector, and all we do is feedback. So not only collecting the feedback, but helping our customers analyze it, then ultimately action it. And we've worked with more than 1,000 companies over the course of our lifetime in this space, and we currently have PSA integrations with all the big players: Kaseya, Autotask, and ConnectWise Manage. And then we have a bunch of other cool supporting integrations in the technical ecosystem like BrightGauge, Power BI, MS Teams, and so on. And so for those of you who are using CSAT, which is great, and you can go to the next slide, JB, we'll talk a bit about CSAT and why that's kind of, I like to think of the entry-level drug to feedback, and then NPS is once you really get going in this space and want to really make a party in that, so to speak, to follow the analogy very poorly.
And Andrew, you can't have a good presentation without some cat memes. So I totally appreciate that, you know.
Yes, and so those are our feedback cats, and you'll see them littered throughout the presentation. But yes, I wanted to kind of set the stage with, at the broadest level, why is customer loyalty important? And I think that we all understand intuitively, and maybe even obviously in the abstract, that customer loyalty is important. Of course, we love loyal customers, but what it really means in today's age is, I think, more important than ever. And so first and foremost, and we'll also get into this, it's actually the most efficient way to run your business from so many different standpoints. I think we all know that loyal customers are way easier to manage, but I think from a monetary standpoint or from a revenue standpoint, it can be surprising how important they truly are. And these are a bunch of statistics that we've taken from a bunch of different spaces, but they're pretty good reports, pretty reputable reports. So loyal customers drive an additional 80% of business. The probability of selling to a new prospect can be anywhere from 5 to 20%, but selling to an existing customer is you're 60% to 70% more likely to upsell, cross-sell, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the most important part, and the thing that, especially in today's business landscape with these tech unicorns and rapid growth, hyper growth, whatever the new word is around growth, we forget that it costs usually or often up to 10x to acquire a customer. Rather than retaining a customer. And getting those new customers is great, but selling to our existing ones is much more efficient, it's much more productive, and it's just easier. And also, I think what's really interesting is that loyal customers are the most likely to drive organic referrals. They're the most likely to refer new customers. And this is especially important in the MSP sector, because there's a lot of organic growth in the MSP, a lot of referral activity, more so than a lot of other businesses. And I can even say, for being at some of my previous businesses and even at SmileBack now, we've learned this lesson the hard way. Even though we preach this, we didn't always practice it. And now that we do, now that we focus much more on our customers, on customer retention, and focus a lot less on growth, our business does run much more smoothly, much more effectively, much more efficiently, which is an interesting phenomenon to encounter, especially because so much of the thinking today, or the discussion in business, is around growth and not retention.
Andrew, we've had several webinars and especially in like our MSP Blast Off series, where the discussion has been around, keep your current customers happy, because they're the ones that are providing the quote unquote word of mouth to new customers about the services that you're providing, whether you're a vendor from a tool perspective or whether you're providing services to another customer. And I think the only way you can understand whether your current customers are happy is by taking surveys, doing polls, right? Doing the CSAT, doing the NPS. Right? So I think your points here are just spot on.
Yeah, and the number one way, if we go to the next slide, at the highest level to ensure customer loyalty, is to have a good customer experience. And one of the really interesting things, I think this was in the CSAT benchmarking survey, is that only 33% of all MSPs they surveyed are actually even tracking customer satisfaction. And this doesn't mean CSAT, like capital C customer satisfaction. This is just, how do my customers feel in some way? Right? So we can count that. Just, I get feedback from email, or I ask them, hey Violet, how do you feel about our service? Like that could count as customer satisfaction at the most basic level, and that's great. That's a good starting point. But yeah, only 38%, which is a little bit surprising, especially given that this is increasingly becoming the number one indicator of brand loyalty and customer experience. And my theory is this is moving from the B2C space into the B2B space, where customer experience is not only it's the expectation. It's the norm now that people have a good customer experience, even in technical aspects, that they care about it, that they nurture it, and also that they have social proof of what that customer experience is. And then this was interesting too, was that 84% of companies that work to improve their customer experience see a commensurate increase in revenue. So there's a cause and effect relationship. If I'm paying attention to my customer experience, if I'm trying to create a good customer experience, you're going to see the increase in revenue naturally. And so what's the best way to pay attention to the customer experience? It's probably feedback, just as you said. So if we go to the next slide, if we think about managing, measuring, and quantifying your customer experience. You do that through feedback. You do that through asking your customers, how do they feel? And I think the felt experience is very important here. And when we get into different methodologies for how to do customer satisfaction, how to do customer feedback, those choices make a difference. But the most important thing is just to have some understanding of how your customers feel. And some understanding that can be measured, that can be managed, can be quantified, because then you can do things like identify issues. You can understand what's really good, what's not so good, what needs to be improved, and where and how. The amazing thing is that often your best customers, or any customer, client, whatever you want to call them, they're going to tell you, if you ask the right way, what you need to fix. You don't even have to do that much work, because they're going to say, I want this fixed, I want this fixed, I think you could do this better. And anyone who's investing the time to tell you these things is indirectly communicating that they're invested in the relationship. And same too with people who are giving you positive feedback, right? They're saying, this is great, I like this thing about your services. That reinforces and affirms to you, this is a very efficient, very optimized area of your business, and an area too that then you can market, right? You can use that positive feedback to identify opportunities for growth, and you can improve your existing client relationships, which I don't think you can ever give your existing client relationships enough love. Like, it just keeps more and more nurture. It always works. And then, as I said, you can take that positive feedback to identify segments for growth, to identify opportunities for referral, and to create that social proof that's really important in the growth marketing area.
It's a valid point there, Andrew. And one thing that we did get a question, and I think you're going to talk a little bit about this, but I'm going to change the question that we got. The question was really around the fact that they've had issues getting feedback from customers, whether it's completing surveys or managing that. And I know you're going to talk about some of the methods by which you can generate these. But let me spin this question and ask you this. When you're asking for feedback, do you have any thoughts on what your, let's call it, expected response rate should be? I mean, even when we did the poll earlier about whether you're doing getting customer feedback or not everybody that's on this webinar chose to answer that poll. What's your thoughts on expected rates as we go to this next slide?
Yeah, and so this is focusing on that first pillar of feedback, which is collecting feedback. And so the number one things I think about are quality and quantity, right? Am I getting a lot of good feedback? And to the question from Lyle there, who is even a SmileBack customer, number one, I would say to the SmileBack customer, part of it is book a consultation with our customer team. Eben Marks, I saw, is attending this webinar. He's our customer lead. And so consultation is part of SmileBack, and so we try to practice what we preach, and so we can offer a consultation on how to increase your response rates. So that's probably the number one. Talk to people who know how to do this. In terms of the survey design itself, and this is on the survey designer, so us or anyone like this, simplicity is the number one thing. You want to make it as easy as possible for your end user to provide a simple answer, and that's usually to have a very simple question, one question, with then the opportunity for them optionally to provide qualitative feedback, to leave a testimonial afterward. So that's the survey design. Second, you want to use a standardized survey, something that someone's going to see as recognizable. NPS, how likely are you to recommend Lyle Thomas Incorporated, is a great question because people have seen it in other places, and then you can benchmark against it. And then the third piece, and this is probably the hardest piece, is building. You can't just set and forget it. You have to constantly be training and educating your customer base, your client base, around why it's in their interest to answer the survey. And so that's doing things in the day-to-day, like anytime you get negative feedback from a client, you instantly answer it. You follow up on it. You show them through positive reinforcement that when they do something, when they respond to your survey, you action it. You take meaningful action, because then they see it as in their interest to do these things. And that also you prepare your customers for the survey. You allow them to understand why you're sending it to them, what you're going to do with it. And so it's expectation management. And that can also be hard too, because then you have to get the customers to pay attention to the message about you trying to get them to pay attention to the survey. And one of the advantages about being a company that's focused exclusively on this is we've come up with our own ways of doing this. We prototype our own processes internally before rolling them out to our customer base, and we have 1,000 different customers who we're talking to who give us tips and tactics that we would have never thought of that we can then share back with our customer base. And there's quite a few. The main ones, though, really the number 1 and 2 are positive reinforcement, so always acting on feedback in a meaningful way. And then 2 is priming your customers to respond to surveys so they understand when they get them, why they get them, and why it's in their interest to respond to them.
That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense.
I have one question on that. Is there also some kind of element of, like, for example, I do quite a bit of email marketing and have done surveys in the past, and there is quite a bit of, in order to get those percentages up of responses, there is quite a bit, people that open one email don't open another one, so you have to.
Yeah, and I think it's especially hard in the email marketing space. And so one of the things with CSAT, we always recommend doing it at the close of every ticket, because your end user is most primed to respond at that point, because you've just closed the issue, and this is when they're thinking, or you'd think they'd be thinking, how did they do on that? This is when I want to give them a positive, a neutral, or a negative. And then, and so that's like priming them. It's the right time for the survey. And then with NPS, which is harder to get response rates because it's much closer to email marketing, it's doing it at a frequency. So Bain Capital, Bain is who created this methodology. The recommended cadence, although as you get more sophisticated, you start to understand, just as with email marketing, there's different methodologies for different segments. But the classic example is a quarterly survey, because it's enough to remember that you get the survey often enough. It's enough to get different feedback every time you do the survey, but it's not so much that people feel overwhelmed, that they feel survey fatigue, that they just think, stop. Of course, some people are always going to think this, carpet bombing me with surveys, and it might just be a bad day where they've got 20 emails. That's going to happen, but you can put yourself in the best position to get the highest response rate by following these best practices. Or send them to Canadians. Canadians answer surveys at a higher rate than anybody else in the entire world, and like considerably higher.
That is funny. That is super funny. Well, yeah, Violet, being from Canada, you should appreciate that. Very good.
Sorry, I got kind of off there, but yeah, and so then the rest, so that's like the collecting feedback, which is the first piece. And then in terms of having a feedback strategy, I think the 3 pieces are collecting and then assessing. So that's understanding, driving insights from the data, because it's one thing to get data, it's another thing to understand it. And then finally, and this is when you reach kind of the highest level, I'd say the highest order of feedback, is taking meaningful action. Because if you're just getting data, that's really vanity metrics, right? Because if you're not doing anything with it, it's just numbers that tell you you're awesome or you're not so awesome. And then assessing is getting insights, which take to another level. You start to understand your business, but you really want to be in the place where you're taking meaningful action from that data, where you're building processes and automating those processes throughout your technical ecosystem and through your account managers, in order to make that data have the effect you want it to, that feedback data to be meaningful at the outset, to drive your business forward and drive your client relationships forward.
Those all make good sense. And this is a very pertinent slide, right? You can generate lots of data out of all of this and be overwhelmed. So, I know, having looked through some of these slides, Andrew, you're going to touch on, okay, after we collect this data, how do we assess it and leverage it in a little bit more detail? So
yeah, and it's great if you get tons of data, and it can be very overwhelming. The important thing, though, is to just find places to start, right? To take one segment of data, even it could be as simple as like a recurring NPS survey, to the decision makers at each of your clients that runs on a quarterly basis, and you come up with processes that say, we do this for this feedback, this for this feedback, this for this feedback. NPS is already, and actually so is CSAT, has 3 categories: positive, negative, neutral, promoter, passive, detractor. And so it's already set up in segments. And so all you need is 3 processes to start. And you can even, with a tool like SmileBack or with any of the tools out there, you can create automations that will even do the work for you. You set the process and forget it. I recommend always touching it at the beginning. But yeah, so that's one way of kind of going through that cycle and not being overwhelmed by that, holy crap, lots of data, and to make the data work for you and not to feel like drowning in data, which I think probably a lot of us feel now, because there is just so much data thrown at us. I threw a bunch of data on those initial slides, right, and then tried to provide some insight and some action you can take from them, so it does have meaning. And anyway, so this is the collecting feedback slide. So this is, you want a lot of good data, so that's the high quantity, high quality. And these are CSAT surveys. So CSAT is on the left. How did we do on this request is the typical language, or how did we do on this transaction? How do we do on this? How was our service for this ticket? Whatever, positive, negative, neutral, really easy, one-click smiley face. Everyone knows how to deal with an emoji. You even see those in airport bathrooms now, which I find a little bit weird. That's not us. You hit the smiley, and then there's an optional comment field so that the user can give you a little bit more, if they want to, a little more color on that. The reason you don't want to make that mandatory is because what you'll end up doing is lowering your response rate, because people won't respond to the initial survey because they don't want to leave a comment. And then with NPS, a little bit more complicated. It's a scale from 0 to 10, and it actually does measure brand or customer loyalty. And the question is very specific: how likely are you to recommend, company X, product, whatever, service to a friend or a colleague? And the idea here with this question is that you get at this underlying sense of, are you likely to recommend, which means you're loyal, or are you not, which means you're disloyal? And here again, actually Bain and SmileBack as well offer a lot of advice out of the box on what to do when you get different scores. And that's taken from surveys being distributed all over the world to many different segments. And there's a lot of really good benchmarking data you can draw on there to see how other MSPs do, how other MSPs do in certain geographies, or how other MSPs do in certain service segments.
So NPS scores, they fascinate me. I mean, as an engineer and a guy who loves math and statistics, I've kind of followed how NPS has come about. And the last thing that you said there about the comparison within your market, within your even segment within a market, it's fascinating how you can get these comparisons, and it'll help you understand where you are in relation to your competition. As long as you're trying to compare apples and apples, which it's difficult, but the way NPS was developed helps kind of level the playing field on that, which again, I'm just fascinated by, and I think it's a very, very important metric that everybody should be using.
Yeah, and I think that what you highlighted there, comparing apples to apples, is really important, because often users want to customize that question for their own design, and
Right.
that can be useful. However, it just removes that entire level of benchmarking and simplicity that comes with the question that gives it a lot of utility. So I would never say it's wrong. It's just you generally need to be very advanced before you want to start customizing these things.
Be aware of
you actually lose a lot in changing the question.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And yeah, that's why I already touched on this. One-click systems are good because you increase response rates by making them simple, making them easy, making them intuitive. CSAT has to be the simplest, easiest survey out there, and that's probably why the airport bathrooms are misapplying them.
I want to make a comment there too. I have a hard enough time grabbing the door handle when I'm walking out of a public bathroom. The last thing I want to do is now push another button where somebody may not have washed their hands on. So that's just a whole other problem right there. So.
Yeah, especially in these times. And then, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, this is, and we don't need to get wildly into this, but this is how NPS works. As you said, it's a very highly designed, there's a lot going on in the background there. 0 to 6 is that detractor. So these are people who might actively say, we don't like you. We don't like Domotz, you shouldn't use them. Then you've got the 7 to 8, which is the passive. So you can think of them as neutral. They're not going to recommend you, but they're also not going to say anything nasty about you. And that's an opportunity to move them into a promoter. And then your promoters are great. Those are your 9s and 10s. So these are the people who are currently recommending you or would be willing to recommend you. And so we often say, reach out to these people to recommend you. Like they've just literally said, I will recommend you. So leverage that. See, do they have anyone in their network who they would recommend you to, or build a case study with them if that's something you do. These people are really like, they want to be your brand advocates. With this survey, they're putting up their hand to say, we love you guys, you're really good, you're so good that we would love to see you be more successful. And so this can be very powerful. And just one other note I would add too, with NPS, you're going to get commentary that's a lot more useful for marketing assets, because people aren't going to be commenting on the specific interaction. They're not going to be saying, Violet did a great job on this. I love her understanding of network monitoring services, and she was very polite, right? That's kind of a weird thing to just put on a Google review. Whereas with NPS, because you're saying how likely to recommend Domotz, you're going to get a lot more at the company, at the product, at the service level that says, I've been with Domotz for 5 years. They've handled, my network. I've never had any issues. They've been, responsive, well-priced, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can see that you get different, you get these proof points about the individuals from CSAT, which can be very compelling. And then you get proof points about the company from NPS. So you can see how there's different use cases depending on the survey that you use.
Yep. Yeah. So then there's this, right?
I did have a question about that. This is just something that jumped out. So what if you're like a smaller MSP, let's say, and you could just ask people these questions one-to-one, is like, call them up and say, how are we doing? Is there a difference between why it works better using a solution like this, or just kind of verbally collecting that feedback?
I mean, I think if you're small enough where you're out, having lunch with your clients every single, or not every day, that'd be ridiculous, but regularly, and you can get a good pulse on the relationship. Then you're doing you're tracking customer satisfaction. You're just doing it a little more old school. But it could still be in a very, very meaningful way. I would say the only risk with that is that you don't have then the ability to automate things as you get bigger, to have processes that scale. And so I think that that's a great thing to do. And I think it's a great thing to do in addition to having proper tooling behind it. It's just that, when it's all in your head and it's all based purely on the feels, and it doesn't necessarily have the methodology behind it that an NPS has. It doesn't have the ability for you to take all of that data and, like this cat is doing, look for patterns in it. I think that's just where it's not quite as powerful. But I do think it's actually powerful in its own way, and we have seen sort of the flip side of that. A lot of SmileBack customers who do really well with feedback and with high CSAT scores, high NPS, they use it to inform their QBRs, their quarterly business reviews with their key clients, and they'll take that 3 months worth of data and use it as a talking point to say, look, here's where we've done really well. Here's where we've really been excelling. Here's where we've had a couple issues, and here's what we're doing to correct those. And it also can be a very useful way of anchoring the conversation, returning to the conversation over time, because you have this framework, and also making it about data, because you can imagine some situations where you have this kind of this recency bias, right? Yesterday, I had a bad interaction, even though the last 100 were great. QBRs, the next day, or the lunches the next day, and all you end up talking about is this one issue that happened yesterday, and while needs attention, it's completely disproportionate to the larger relationship that you want to be looking at. So I think these are the kind of things where having the data, having the tooling, having the scalability can be very advantageous.
It's a good point. It's a very good point.
And I kind of, just very perfect segue, Violet, because I talked about like, yeah, the business performance, the client relationships, but then there's also a part here too for MSP specifically around team performance, is that you can see how your team's doing, how different segments are doing with, if you have a larger business, different locations, right, that are servicing different clients. You can compare and contrast within the business, and with SmileBack or any tool that you want to use, probably you can add tags, metadata to the different interactions as they come in, the data points. You can start to get that meta layer that gives you an overview of what's doing well with the team and maybe what's not doing so well. And even on the individual level, does someone need some more support? Are they having a hard time? They're getting regular neutral reviews on certain specific topics, and you can find opportunities to level up your team's game. And especially if you have different levels of management, it can be really useful to kind of level up those that reporting mechanism, to the manager, to the director level, then all the way potentially to the C level with those top line metrics. Next, and I've kind of touched on all these, and there's so many more questions, but I think when you're looking for the patterns in the data with your CSAT cats, you can figure out how you're doing overall and then specific areas. And then the most common one, and I think one of the early things to look for, is just what are the major positive, negative trends? I think negative feedback is the most valuable feedback. We recently, with Eben and our customer team, we actually got a few negatives in a row, and we were like, ooh, but then we went, no, this is great, because it illuminated to us the areas where we need to improve. And if we hadn't got that negative, we got a lot of months where we're at 100, we would have just kept coasting along. And so while at first it kind of hurt the feels, once we took a breath and we had our L10 meeting and we reviewed and analyzed what happened, then we created an entire project for this quarter in order to address all of the issues that we'd identified through the negative trends that we saw in the business.
Andrew, the interesting thing what you're saying there about the negative feedback, and you alluded to this earlier, and it kind of gets to the question that Lyle mentioned earlier, which is if you're getting feedback like that, it means that people value what you're doing and they want to see you improve. They're engaged with you.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important aspect. And to Lyle's question that he asked earlier about how do we make sure that engagement is happening, right? That you have to explain to the customer, hey, this is important to us, positive or negative, right? We want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for you because we use the word partner a lot in the service provider world, and the fact of the matter is that between the vendor-client relationship, if you guys are acting as partners, then you want to see the best for each other, and that's where I think this is so important.
Yeah. Exactly. And I just saw that, I hope I pronounced this right, Peter Gutzwald asked if there's a direct integration between SmileBack and Domotz. No, there's not currently. This was our first interaction together, but perhaps could be something in the future, especially after we run this cheeky experiment we've been talking about.
Yeah, we'll talk about why the two, I think, still work really well together when we get to the end here. So let me move on.
Yeah, I mean, why don't we jump to that right now? Just because I've talked through a lot of like the power of automation, I think, just sprinkle it around here. And really, this is always my main point: take meaningful action. And that what are the key results, the key outcomes of focusing on customer satisfaction? It really means that you'll improve your customer retention. With that, you'll improve your operational efficiency because you'll understand the issues in your business vis-a-vis your clients, and you'll have increased growth opportunities. And so I think those three pieces to me are really powerful outputs of focusing on the importance of customer feedback.
And that I'm going to call it mantra, right? That you, Andrew, are pushing, and that SmileBack, fundamental. I mean, these are some of your tenets, right? That you speak to, which is great, and it's exactly why to the question that Peter asked here, right? How does Domotz fit in with this? Well, for the last 5 years that we've been talking about Domotz and what we do, I have continued to say that our core value proposition as a software as a service and as a tool for integrators, even though we are a network monitoring system fundamentally, it's really about driving efficiency into your business, and it's about generating customer loyalty. And we use the term loyalty. I use it quite often because to me it's a really important word or phrase. And the idea behind it is if you can have your clients be pleased or happy with the services that you are providing them, they are going to promote you, right? Going back to that whole NPS, that Net Promoter Score, they're going to be the ones that are saying, yeah, you know, Company X did a great job for us and it's exactly why we're using them. And those kind of conversations, whether they happen around the bar, whether they happen at a trade show, whether they happen on social media, which, you know, Violet, I know you see a lot of that occurring where MSPs are talking about vendors, this and that, they're sharing customer experiences. All of that is improved when you have higher customer loyalty. So here's the challenge though. You have no way of knowing whether a customer is loyal to you or not unless you ask for that feedback. And so even though there isn't a direct integration, I don't know that there needs to be a direct integration between Domotz and SmileBack. I do think that you as a service provider need to be leveraging a tool like SmileBack into your PSA tools, right? Into your ticketing systems, doing the customer CSATs, sending them out emails on how you're doing, like Andrew has said, on a quarterly basis or whatever it may be. In the end, right, to me, it's why the two tools together fit so well. If you have watched some of the webinars that we have done or I've done on our demos, I talk about this notion of a recovery paradox, right? The beauty of the recovery paradox is it says that, you know, if an issue occurs and, you know, well, let me say it this way. The recovery paradox says that customer loyalty just increases over time, assuming that all things stay fixed. But when an issue occurs, right, that loyalty can change. You can actually improve the loyalty if you respond quickly, if you communicate effectively as to what happened, if you put processes in place to help, you know, to mitigate that issue from occurring again, right? Those are all ways in which you can generate more loyalty. But to Andrew's point, the things that he talked about, the only way you're going to know whether you did the right thing is by asking for feedback from this. I mean, Andrew, do you have any thoughts on this notion of the recovery paradox or how we fit together? Did you want to say anything about that?
I've never heard the recovery paradox before. That makes a lot of sense to me. And also in the NPS theory, let's call it, it is best practice to send NPS surveys after any major change to your relationship with your customer or client. So at the completion of a big project, if there was some major issue, because that's when you do see exactly what you said, the highest fluctuation in the data and the most potential for your loyalty to increase or decrease. Because all things being equal, it'll stay relatively equal, although over time, typically, yeah, you get more loyalty just as time goes. So that makes perfect sense with the NPS theory. And I think, and this is sort of, you know, getting ahead on the context of it, but what we talked a lot about, which I think is very interesting, is using NPS every time you onboard a new service. So if you onboard a service like Domotz, then it's important to do an NPS survey prior to that implementation and onboarding, and then 3, 6, 12 months out in order to see what is the relationship between bringing something this on and your Net Promoter Score. How does the perception of your product or service change when you change the business or the nature of the service relationship? And that's it right there. Yeah, you don't need a technical integration for that, right? You just need those business processes in place and that thinking in place. And I think that's why it's really interesting to me that 0% are using NPS, and totally understandable. And we're trying to do a lot of education in the market around the power of NPS and why more folks should be using it. And it's great to see that CSAT has kind of become, you know, getting pretty close to, you know, 50% here. A lot of people are using it, but we really want to drive NPS because we think it can be more powerful.
Andrew, I'm going to make a statement. You tell me if I'm way off base here. But when I look at a CSAT score, I think of this, and I may not say this correctly, but I think of that being a point in time, and if the customer is satisfied with a particular task or a particular service that I just provided them. Whereas the NPS, right, the Net Promoter Score, really says how likely is this customer of mine going to, well, to use the word promote, right, or push me in the realm of social media, in the realm of like trade events or wherever it may be, where they're going to actually talk and say, hey, you know, if you need a tool like this, if you need a service like this, look at this company, right? There's a big difference there, I think. One is kind of backward looking, where one is more forward looking. Is that a correct?
Yeah, one's transactional and one's relational. And so, yeah, I think and we like to use the analogy of the date and the relationship. So I think we can all imagine a scenario where we go out with our like a romantic partner, and you go on a date, and it's an amazing date. Like for me, if we go for ice cream, like it's a great date, no questions. And so like you get your ice cream, positive, right? That's CSAT. But the relationship could still be at a 0. And so if you're only asking CSAT, you're going to get, hey, yeah, this was a great transaction. I got my ice cream. But if you don't ask the relational question, you're not going to find out that, yeah, while giving ice cream produces a good result, it's not fixing the fundamental issues. And we've certainly seen that in data with some of our customers who have reached out and said, oh my God, like I never realized I had a 98 CSAT score, which is great. But once I started doing NPS, I started to get some qualitative data on the services we weren't providing. Right? So the services we were delivering were choice, but they were looking at competitors because they offered something that the current provider wasn't.
Well, there can also be the reciprocal of that too. I mean, you can have such a valued service that that your NPS scores are high, right? People will recommend you, but they can be frustrated with current issues, right? Because you know a new feature came out, maybe even a bug came out, and it's making that client's life difficult at that time. But so they're dissatisfied with that, and you can have lower CSAT scores, but they can still be promoters. Now, I think it's a fine line there, but do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. And it's important to consider all those possibilities. I can't think of an example off the top of my head in our sector, but I mean, it's pretty easy to imagine. So some of the companies in the world that have the highest NPS scores are like Tesla. People love driving Tesla cars. That doesn't mean Tesla's customer support is good. So they get really high NPS scores, but they could get, I don't know if this is true, but they could get a lot of, especially if Elon Musk is answering their customer service tickets, you know, they might get a lot of negatives over there, right? So that you can have that relationship as well, most definitely.
It's because he's talking down on Dogecoin or Bitcoin or something.
Or smoking weed and
yeah, exactly. Well,
I did have a question about that, just the difference between the CSAT and the NPS. So the CSAT is something you collect like after an event that happens, where the NPS is something that you collect on more like a quarterly basis.
Exactly. Yeah, and so the typical idea is that CSAT is in this sector at the close of a ticket is the easiest one, but yeah, there's some finite like beginning and end to an interaction, and at the end of that interaction, you want to know how good was that interaction. And here, the bathrooms in the airports work, right? You went to the bathroom, was it a good bathroom visit or not? Whereas NPS is more seen over time, and so at SmileBack we use this idea of a campaign being there's a certain frequency with a certain number of users who display some characteristic who you send the survey to, and you see your relationship over time. But there can be key events in that relationship, like the onboarding of a new service, that can also be useful for NPS, because you want to see the change in a dynamic.
Yeah, makes sense. So I wanted to bring this up because we're getting close on our time and we need to talk about a few more things here, but we want to, Andrew, between you and Violet and myself, we really believe in this stuff. We wanted to kind of put our money where our mouth is on this, and we wanted to run an experiment. And we're really ultimately looking for a volunteer. We want somebody that's going to, implement SmileBack, implement Domotz, and follow the process over the next 6 to 9 months. Let's assume it's 6 months for now. But we believe that in two things. One is that by you as a service provider implementing a means of getting feedback, you'll be able to improve your services to your clients if you follow some of the recommendations that Andrew has provided. But from a Domotz perspective, we also believe that if you have Domotz implemented to clients over time, that you will be able to provide better services, ultimately improving the feedback that you get from them. And we want to test this. We want to see what happens. We want to see if a network management system and a customer feedback system really does improve customer loyalty, really does improve your net promoter score from your clients. So I'm super excited to do this. And Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically we want to get people over the next 10 or 15 days to email us and offer up if they want to be a volunteer in this, if they want to take us up on this test. What's your thoughts on this, Andrew?
Yeah, so I like this graphic too. I think it's, we want to build the theory, and there's a theory, and we want to apply it in practice, and we want to be able to come back here with that customer or those customers, I think, Violet, and do a webinar, and so that they can say, look, this worked or this didn't work, yes, and here's what we learned from it. And so we want SmileBack customers to put up their hand who are already using the tools and they want to implement Domotz and then prove the case for us. And so we'll follow up, I think, to the webinar list and others, and then anyone who's interested to learn more can put up their hand, right?
Exactly. So we're gonna send out some more information about how to call it, be a volunteer, and we'll go through that selection process, but then we'll work with you directly on that. So that being said, let's move to this next thing. We want to ask some Q&A, a few of them that we've already answered on here. Andrew, were there any specific questions that you think you guys get as a provider of this type of feedback that you feel our listeners should know about now? Like the implementation, right? How often do you schedule these? How do you get these feedback? You also volunteered or said that your customers should speak to you guys or speak to your team if they need help with stuff. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think the question Lyle Thomas asked about increasing response rate is probably the best question to ask, and we do get it from a lot of customers, and we try to get anyone we can to listen to us on those things, and we don't have the perfect answers, obviously, but I do think a consultation with SmileBack around how to increase your response rate is a great question. Often we get asked, what do you recommend for handling negative feedback? And I touched a bit on that. And the reason I bring it up too is often there can be a disconnect between the C-level or whoever's running the business and the agents. And so the number one thing about how do you handle negative feedback is don't punish people for getting negative feedback, because as I in the example with SmileBack, right, it's an opportunity, and so we try to take a neutral stance, let's say, to feedback. So feedback's all about what you do with it. So negative feedback is good, and positive feedback is good if you action it, if you learn from it. And so the number one thing I'd say with negative feedback is treat it as an opportunity, even though that sounds cheesy. I think in this case it's true. And two, build processes around, and I think actually something you said about Domotz, and they're around how do you take action quickly with negative feedback, right? So how do you instantly action it, and how do you effectively, right? Which is similar to network events. You need to deal with it right away, and you need to deal with it in a purposeful way. And we see customers take that in many different forms. Some of them use our automation actions that are built in to the SmileBack platform that you can use with your PSA. Some of them have emails set up where they escalate in the case of negative feedback to a manager who then has another escalation process in place. And then some of them also respond, have automation set up so there's an instant response to that customer. Yeah. The main thing being make sure that customer feels heard.
Yeah, and that last part you just said there is kind of the point I wanted to touch on. I agree that, you know, so there's an element of negative feedback which you as a company need to be able to absorb. You then need to be able to take action on it with a caveat. And that caveat is the feedback that's coming to you. I think you need to, you know, look internally to your company, whether you're, you know, the president, the owner, or you're, you know, just an individual contributor within that company that's receiving that feedback. You have to internalize whether that is the right feedback, and will taking an action on that feedback, will it lead towards your vision, your mission, your goals of your company and what you want to achieve? Because there is a point at which if you're getting just tons of negative feedback from one particular individual, or maybe it's a set of clients, it very well could be that those clients are not a good fit for your company. And we've had webinars in the past that we've talked about in our MSP Blast Off series, where we discuss about, you know, being willing to fire the customer, right? Being willing to say, hey, Mr. Customer, this isn't working. And the last thing you want from a customer that's continuing to give you negative feedback, that if you can't make change on that, or you can't, if they're bringing down your services, right, your NPS score over time, and you don't want to change, then it's probably a good thought to sever that relationship. And having this type of feedback is important to understanding whether this is the right move or not. That's an opinion that I have. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean that's a bold decision, but I think it's important. I think it's important to recognize that as well, because you have to have the self-awareness when you get feedback to realize what it means. And so I think, yeah, it's a great point. You could get over and over time the same issues coming up, and you have two choices, right? You can either correct them or you can eliminate them. And it's all about what's the right choice for your business.
Yeah. But I bring this up because unless you have a mechanism to get this type of feedback and understand where your customer is in their thought process, you're just in limbo, and that's one of the worst places to be, right? You want to understand whether the relationship is positive or the relationship is negative, so that you can take appropriate action. So
yeah.
We just had another question come in here, which I think is a really interesting one.
Yeah.
It says that most end users are used to ratings like 5 stars. So I guess how do people leverage something like SmileBack and say I'm rated XYZ by X amount of users as a kind of social proof on their website?
Yeah, so, and I think that's a really good point. And actually, we were talking, I'm in Paris today with my product owner, and we were discussing this exact thing for our roadmap. And so timing is very good. So CSAT is a little more recognized, I think, and we even have some customers who tell us their clients say, one of your in the SLA is a CSAT of X. And so a CSAT can be a little bit more widely known. It's a score out of 100. So it's basically a percentage. And so it's a little bit easier to understand. Whereas NPS is very difficult to just look at and understand if it's good or bad. So that's a very good point. And so one of the things we were talking about today was for the website widget, perhaps it'd be useful to, instead of having your NPS number, is just being able to display the NPS individual comments with or the CSAT ones. And again, this is just work in progress I'm sharing with you, because the individual comments have a score of green, yellow, red, smiley face, negative, neutral, negative, or 0 to 10. Most people understand intuitively where you sit on the score when you get those. Not everyone, but most. And so I think there is value, which it sounds like you're suggesting, Peter, in being able to display the testimonials absent potentially the actual NPS calculated score itself. And with CSAT, I think it can work, but also the same principle applies where you could display just the individual reviews with the testimonials absent the aggregated score, because yes, it might not be clear what that means to most people, because in the B2C world, the stars are a much more common phenomenon.
Yeah. It's hard to say that you get 98% smiley faces, so.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the problem with, so I live in Germany, right? And so a good score on a Google review for a German business, like a bar or a restaurant, is like around 4 stars, right? Whereas if you got a 4-star review back home where I'm from in Canada, like that would be like, ew, this is a very bad establishment. And so there's different cultural contexts to how you score things, right? And so, which is all to say, Peter, I agree with you.
It's kind of interesting, right? 4 stars, if you extrapolate that to the NPS, 4 stars is about a rating of an 8, which means they're roughly neutral, right?
Yeah.
And passive, exactly. I mean, it's getting close to passive, and that's why I think people just inherently feel like, okay, 4 stars may not be as good as if it was 4.7 or something. So it's interesting.
Yeah, well, but in Germany, like there's nothing's 4.7, right? So it's completely culturally and even individually, how do I perceive this? And of course, the testimonials can be perceived differently as well, but you can kind of influence people's perception by the color scheme we give to it, by their established relationship to smiley, neutral, negative, to 0 to 10. So it's a little safer, I think, and a little more meaningful. It's a good point.
Well, Andrew, we're right at the top of the hour here. I want to show 2 slides so that people have this, right? First of all is, how do they get in touch with you if they're not familiar with SmileBack? By all means, hit smileback.com. Feel free to email Andrew at smileback.com, which I appreciate you putting your email out there and allowing people to get a hold of you. The next one, of course, is about Domotz. We want you to stay connected. Please email us if you have questions about Domotz, support@domotz.com. Visit our website, try us out. And more importantly, with respect to this experiment, please feel free to email Andrew, email support@domotz.com, and we will get this feedback. I think between Violet and myself, we'll probably send out an email to everybody that attends the webinar to say how you can take advantage of this experiment we're doing here. So we look forward to hearing from you. Andrew, I really appreciate your time, and I wanted to go up a slide. I wanted to say thank you for joining us here. Did you have any other closing comments you'd like to make?
No, it's a great discussion, and I'm always happy to talk this stuff. So yeah, thanks. And anyone can reach out anytime. They don't even need to be a SmileBack customer. We're just happy to talk about it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Expect to see a follow-on webinar here in about 6 months as well. So thank you. Talk to you soon. Thanks, Violet.
Ciao. Thanks, Violet.
Talk to you soon. Bye.